Imagine standing on an ancient battlefield. You've
Mm.
got your weapon, your armor is strapped tight, and, you are just waiting for the enemy champion to step forward.
Right, you're expecting that classic honorable duel of swords.
Exactly. You're expecting a real test of martial skill, but instead, the sky above you just turns pitch black with this choking smoke.
Yeah, completely blinding everyone.
And gravity itself seems to crush you into the dirt.
Yeah.
And before you can even, raise your shield, these massive wheels of fire materialize in the clouds.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, raining literal roaring dragons of flame down on your entire army. So there is no duel. There's only a fiery apocalypse.
And it's a profound shift in how conflict is depicted. I mean, we are so conditioned to view ancient mythology through the lens of one-on-one heroic combat.
Right, where two warriors, exchange dialogue and cross spears.
Exactly. But the texts we are examining today, they just dismantle that entirely.
They really do. And we have a massive stack of notes for today's deep dive, pulling from the classic Chinese epic Fengshen Yanyi, which is also known as the Investiture of the Gods.
It's such a rich source.
It really is. And honestly, reading through these sources, it feels less like reading a centuries-old myth and much more like, I don't know, reading the script for a modern blockbuster action movie.
Yeah, the scale is just massive.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Our mission today is to analyze this terrifyingly powerful figure named Luo Xuan.
The ultimate fire-type immortal.
Yes, the ultimate fire-type immortal of this mythical universe.
Yeah.
And we want to figure out how he operates almost like a modern supervillain and what his overwhelming power reveals about the rigid, almost mathematical rules of the cosmos he inhabits.
Well, to really understand Luo Xuan, we first have to understand the geopolitical reality of the text. Because the overarching conflict in Fengshen is a war of regime change.
Right.
You have the Shang Dynasty, which is this old, decaying regime desperately trying to cling to power. And fighting against them are the heroes of Xiqi.
And they represent the incoming Zhou dynasty, right?
Yeah, exactly. And they're backed by the will of the heavens. So Luo Xuan is a member of the Ji sect, which is a faction of incredibly powerful rogue immortals. They basically step in as these heavy-hitting reinforcements for the doomed Shang forces.
And when Luo Xuan steps onto the battlefield for the Shang, he is not just bringing a slightly larger-than-average sword.
No, definitely not.
The sources are incredibly specific about his power set. He doesn't just use regular fire. He masters something called Samadhi True Fire, alongside Taoist Divine Fire and magical Heavenly Fire.
It's a lot of fire.
It is. Wait, I have to stop right there.
Mm.
When the text says Samadhi True Fire, what does it actually mean? I mean, is it just a poetic way of saying it burns really, really hot?
No, it is entirely different from conventional fire. And this requires a quick look at the mechanics of Taoist alchemy.
Okay.
So normal fire is just a chemical reaction, right? You add oxygen to wood, you get a flame, you throw water on it, you disrupt the reaction, and the fire goes out.
Makes sense.
But Samadhi True Fire is not a chemical reaction. It's a metaphysical flame generated from a cultivator's own internal life force. Specifically, their essence, vitality, and spirit.
Whoa.
Yeah, Luo Xuan is essentially weaponizing his own spiritual energy and projecting it outward.
So because it's metaphysical, a bucket of water from the local river isn't going to do anything.
Oh, it didn't even cause a hiss.
Yeah.
This fire burns on a spiritual level. That means you need a higher tier, spiritually charged water artifact to even attempt to extinguish it.
That is terrifying.
It is. And add to that his mastery of heavenly fire, which is essentially like divine orbital bombardment and Taoist divine fire. You just have a character who is stacking ultimate tiers of mystical combustion.
Which completely changes his combat style compared to the rest of the cast.
Yeah.
Like we said, most myths feature a hero striking down one specific enemy.
Right.
But Luo Xuan, he doesn't care about targeting a specific enemy. He specializes entirely in wide area destruction.
Yeah.
We're talking about burning entire cities and turning whole armies to ash.
Yeah, AoE, area of effect damage.
Exactly. To put it in modern terms, fighting Luo Xuan is like someone bringing a flamethrower to a fencing match.
That is a great way to put it.
Your opponent is doing all this fancy footwork, preparing to parry, and you just shrug and set the entire arena on fire.
What's fascinating here is how the text deliberately highlights this shift from martial combat to environmental suppression.
Yeah.
The sources note that Luo Xuan changes the battlefield environment itself into an inescapable sea of fire. When the heroes of Xiqi face him, they're completely stripped of their martial arts advantages.
Because they can't even get close.
Right. It is less like fighting an opposing general and much more like trying to fist fight a natural disaster.
Fist fighting a natural disaster.
Yeah.
That is exactly what the text conveys. But that raises an interesting mechanical question.
Okay.
How does one individual actually achieve that? A natural disaster is vast. A human being, even an immortal one, is small. How does he suppress an entire battlefield?
Well, he does it through a highly specific tactical sequence of magical artifacts.
Yeah.
He doesn't just throw fireballs blindly.
Okay, so it's systematic.
Very. The text details an arsenal of 4 primary magical treasures, and they are designed to work together as a devastating ecosystem of fire.
I want to break down this arsenal because the synergy here is just terrifying.
It really is.
Picture this. You are a soldier on this ancient battlefield. You're waiting for the clash of infantry. But the first thing that hits you isn't a blade or a flame. It's Luo Xuan's vanguard weapon, the 10,000-mile cloud-piercing smoke.
And it's the perfect opening move for environmental suppression.
Yeah.
Yeah, the artifact unleashes relentless flames, but more importantly, it generates an unnatural, choking smoke that completely blocks out the sky.
Oh, man.
It blinds the enemy army, disrupts any tactical formations, creates mass panic, and plunges the battlefield into a suffocating darkness. You cannot fight an enemy you cannot see.
And you definitely cannot coordinate a defense when you cannot breathe. Okay, so you're choking, you're blind, the sky is black. You are effectively pinned in place. And because you are pinned down, you become a static target for his second artifact, which is the Heaven Illuminating Seal.
Right, and the Heaven Illuminating Seal represents a completely different application of his element. It's not an explosive weapon.
What is it then?
It's a fire suppression artifact that acts as a crushing weight. It brings physical, blunt force trauma to the heat. It uses the metaphysical density of fire to press the enemy down, pinning them to the earth and preventing any chance of retreat.
So the smoke blinds you, and then the seal crushes you. At this point, you're basically just trapped in a rolling cage.
Yeah, you're helpless.
And this is where his third weapon, the flying smoke sword, comes into play.
The sword acts as the localized cleanup mechanism.
The cleanup.
Yeah, for any high-level targets or agile heroes who somehow manage to break through the smoke and resist the crushing pressure of the seal, the flying smoke sword hunts them down. It's this high-speed flying thread darting through the darkness that inflicts a severe burning effect upon impact.
And then comes the finale, the execution, his magnum opus, the 5-dragon wheel.
Oh, yeah.
The sources say this is his most iconic, most popular weapon among readers. When the enemy is completely trapped and disoriented by those first 3 layers of attack, he unleashes this wheel.
And it's brutal.
It summons roaring, literal flames that take the physical shape of giant fire dragons to just consume whatever is left.
The tactical design of this loadout is brilliant. I mean, smoke to blind, a seal to crush, a sword to hunt, and dragons to eradicate.
It's a whole system.
It is. He creates a self-sustaining ecosystem of destruction. The sources point out that whenever he appears in the narrative, he brings this overwhelming sense of, well, the term is Tianzaigan, which means a deep, profound aura of a natural disaster.
Wow.
And it is entirely visual.
Highly visual. The notes actually emphasize how suited his scenes are for visual media. You can instantly picture the cinematic wide shots.
Oh, absolutely.
The sky turning a bruised red, the tumbling dragons of flame lighting up the smoke, just the sheer oppressive scale of it all. It's cinematic devastation. And we see this exact, ruthless destruction put into practice during his most famous deployment.
The Siege of Xiqi. This occurs late in the massive Shangzu War.
Right.
The G sect is pouring every resource they have into stopping the Zhu heroes from advancing, and they finally order Luo Xuan to descend from the mountains and break the siege.
And he doesn't just challenge the enemy generals to a skirmish. The text says he unleashes a fire attack to destroy the city.
He goes straight for the foundation.
Yeah, he targets the infrastructure, the food supplies, the civilians, the very wooden foundations that Xiqi is built upon. The text describes flames shooting all the way into the heavens, rendering ordinary troops entirely useless.
I mean, a wooden shield cannot block a sea of heavenly fire.
Exactly.
So.
But this specific siege allows the sources to draw a profound parallel. The texts deliberately compare Luo Xuan to another devastating G-sect figure deployed during this war, Lu Yu. Here's where it gets really interesting. This is like the ultimate morbid psychological deep dive.
Let's hear it.
So Lu Yu is the master of plague. He represents disease, biological disaster, and slow, agonizing death.
Very grim.
Right. And Luo Xuan brings a heavenly fire, doomsday instant, explosive burning, 2 entirely different methods of mass destruction. So if you're an ancient civilian living in Xiqi, you are faced with a terrifying dichotomy.
A horrific choice, really.
Yeah, a real would you rather. On one hand, you have the creeping, invisible, prolonged dread of Lu Yu's plague, where you don't even know your neighbor is infected until they collapse in the street.
Right.
And on the other hand, you have the blinding, inescapable, instant inferno of Luo Xuan's fire attack.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, these two characters, Lu Yu and Luo Xuan, are more than just mythical antagonists. They are physical manifestations of ancient humanity's ultimate uncontrollable fears regarding civilization.
Wait, break that down for a second. How do they represent civilization's fears?
Well, think about it. When ancient societies built cities, they built massive walls. Walls provide security. They keep out rival armies, bandits, wild animals.
Sure.
But walls are entirely useless against the two things that destroy cities from within and from above. A wall cannot stop a microscopic plague from spreading through the water supply.
Wow.
That is Lu Yu, the terror of the invisible, the slow decay of society from the inside out.
Yeah, Luo Xuan.
Luo Xuan represents the terrifying, overwhelming speed of elemental destruction. A wall cannot stop fire falling from the sky.
No, it can't.
He embodies the horrifying realization that decades of human progress, the buildings, the infrastructure, an entire bustling city can be erased in a matter of hours by a force that you cannot negotiate with, bribe, or punch into submission.
He is the ancient embodiment of the flash fire that just wipes a town off the map.
It's a sobering thought.
It really is.
But this leads me to a massive, glaring contradiction in the text.
Oh, wait, if his fire dragons can wipe out a whole city in seconds, why are we even talking about a war? Why didn't he just burn the Zhou dynasty off the map on day one and secure the victory for the Shang?
The answer to that lies in the core mechanics of the Fengshen Yanyi universe. His power has a hard ceiling.
A ceiling.
Yes, and that ceiling is not determined by how much spiritual energy he has or how hot his fire burns. It is determined by the rigid mathematical laws of the cosmos. Magic in this world is not a free-for-all. It is a science based entirely on the system of the 5 elements: metal, wood, water, fire, and earth.
So the magic system has its own internal physics engine.
Precisely. It is the rule of 5 elements generation and restriction. Fire generates earth, but fire is restricted by water. It is an inescapable cosmic equation.
Right, it's just math.
Exactly. Luo Xuan can bring the most potent samadhi true fire in existence, but if the heroes of Xiqi deploy an immortal who possesses a higher tier water artifact, the math of the universe kicks in. The fire will be neutralized. It is an elemental bureaucracy. No single element is allowed to dominate because the universe insists on equilibrium.
Okay, so having all this magical firepower, but fighting against the elemental rules of the universe, is like having the fastest sports car in the world, but driving it on a treadmill.
That is perfect, yes.
You are burning massive amounts of energy, you're generating a lot of heat and making a lot of noise, but fundamentally, the ground beneath you dictates that you aren't going to move an inch forward.
That analogy perfectly captures the second, and far more significant, reason for his defeat. He wasn't just fighting the elemental mechanics, he was fighting the overarching narrative of reality itself.
Which the text calls the mandate of heaven.
Yes.
Right? The mandate of heaven. This concept is the absolute bedrock of Chinese history and mythology. It's the idea that a ruler or a dynasty only has the right to rule if they have the approval of the cosmos.
And the sources are incredibly explicit on this point. The Shang Dynasty's fate was mathematically exhausted. Their allotted time in the universe had expired. The heavens had decreed that the Zhou dynasty would rise.
So it was a done deal.
Essentially, yes. By descending from the mountain to fight for the Shang, Luo Xuan and the entire Ji sect were actively attempting to rebel against the script of the universe.
So even with his ecosystem of fire, his dragons and his smoke, he was just fighting gravity.
He was fighting an immovable force. This is the central philosophical thesis of the source material. Characters like Luo Xuan do not lose because they lack raw firepower or martial skill. They lose because the general trend, what the text refers to as daoshi, is against them.
The general trend.
Yes. The story delivers a profound commentary on the nature of power. Raw, destructive, chaotic force, no matter how visually spectacular or objectively terrifying, is ultimately subservient to the grand momentum of fate and cosmic order.
You can burn down a city, but you cannot burn down destiny. That completely recontextualizes his character.
It does.
He's not just a generic blockbuster villain who gets beaten up by the hero because the hero did some push-ups. He is a manifestation of pure, chaotic power crashing against the cold, immovable wall of a highly bureaucratic cosmic order.
And the aftermath of that crash is arguably the most fascinating part of his entire narrative arc.
So what does actually happen to an apocalyptic firebringer who finds himself on the losing side of destiny? I mean, does the Heavenly Order just wipe him from existence?
You would think so.
Do they cast him into a magical void or lock him in an eternal prison? No. The sources detail his fate, and it is a brilliant twist. After he is defeated and killed in battle, Luo Xuan's soul travels to the Investiture altar, and he is actually deified.
The Heavenly Court brings him into the celestial fold.
He is officially appointed as the Southern Xiqi Fire Virtue Star Lord. He becomes a righteous god of the fire department in the celestial bureaucracy.
A literal department of fire.
Yes. And his new job description is to be in charge of fire fortunes in the mortal realm. So what does this all mean? The sheer irony is staggering.
It really is.
The universe took the very force of nature that violently tried to burn down the new kingdom and integrated him straight into the administration of its new cosmic bureaucracy.
It is a profoundly insightful narrative choice. The Heavenly Court recognizes that fire is a necessary element of the universe. You cannot simply erase fire, nor can you erase the chaotic energy Luo Xuan represents.
Right, fire is still fire.
Exactly. So they don't destroy him, they institutionalize him.
They gave the guy who brought the flamethrower to the fencing match a desk job in the HR department of the cosmos.
Basically, yes.
It's incredible. He went from trying to burn down civilization to having to fill out celestial paperwork every time a mortal wants to start a campfire.
And this raises an important philosophical question, one that builds directly on the deep logic of the Fengshen universe we've been discussing.
Okay.
Well, the heavenly bureaucracy took its most destructive, rebellious enemy, a figure who embodied the sheer terror of sudden apocalyptic ruin, and made him the celestial manager of the exact same element he used to cause all that chaos.
He is still fundamentally in charge of fire.
He is. So it forces us to reconsider the nature of authority. Is true cosmic order achieved by violently destroying your most dangerous threats in an endless cycle of war? Or is the ultimate, most absolute form of control achieved by simply giving those chaotic forces a job, a title, and permanently binding them into your bureaucratic system?
Wow. That is a fascinating thought to leave on. You don't defeat the natural disaster by fighting it. You defeat it by making it clock in at 9 a.m. and strictly regulating its output.
Exactly.
It really makes you rethink the whole dynamic of power we started with. Maybe the scariest thing to a chaotic being who just wants to watch the world burn isn't a hero who punches him into submission. It's a cosmic administrative department that gives him a promotion and a list of regulations.
A truly terrifying fate.
Truly. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the sources and for exploring the blazing, tragic, and ultimately bureaucratic tale of Luo Xuan with us. Keep questioning the texts and keep exploring.